processes, the CARICOM and the European Union, that are having already in their strategies, the human resources strategy of the CARICOM and the European Union are setting already benchmarks. So in that case, we're actually not duplicating by taking already on those commitments for those countries, obviously inviting them, in case they should want to do that, to submit their national benchmark in other indicators, or if they want to be more ambitious than what is the regional minimum. We have that at the moment the promise of 8% of the countries promising to submit the benchmarks that they have initiated already their national processes. Both teams has engaged into a massive mining of data plans of national documents, education sectoral plans, voluntary national contributions to the UN revisions each July. And based on that, we have identified that the countries that have not submitted or have not are not under any regional mechanism have targets in those plans, and we consider that those targets obviously are their commitments, and so we have taken them on board. And we have identified also 12% of the countries who have targets, who have plans, but the plans are having no targets. That is also kind of a message to take on board. And we have 6% of the countries at that time that were actually having no national plan identified, at least in the two teams that have been mined this process. But if we can go to the next slide before handing over to Manos, as you can see, as Duncan was mentioning, the level of engagement has changed and supported to the process that the UNESCO is leading. We have almost 60% of the countries have already submitted benchmark. Many of the countries are under regional benchmark processes. Despite that, they have actually shared their additional ambitions for either indicators that are in those regional framework or find other indicators that they would like to commit and to share their ambition with us. We have the pending submissions in 2% of the countries. And also we have still those countries that we have identified the targets. In many cases, we have reviewed with them the targets due to COVID. We have the 10% of the countries who have not, we have not identified targets, and we have no national plan still in that 6% of the countries. This is the status of the submission, and with that, Manos, over to you.
Thank you, Silvia. And just to also say that we analyzed at the time where countries plan to be if they achieve their benchmark values by 2025 and 2030. On this graph, you see the baseline represented by the bar and the two triangles that show the direction in which these countries are moving. And it's clear that countries will not achieve the 2030 targets, but still it is notable that countries do commit to accelerate their progress compared to where they might have otherwise been. And that's quite important because people often ask whether this exercise suggests that we are compromising or we're giving up on the 2030 agenda. I think one better way of looking at it is to say that actually countries do want to do better than they have done in the past. Turning to the next slide, just for you to be aware, all this information has been posted already since November in the Global Education Observatory website of the UIS, which aims to serve as a gateway for access to a series of data. Under the benchmark observatory, you can find all the values that countries have committed to by indicator. You see an example here where you see the value of the country in 2 years, 2 points in time. The regional benchmark at baseline, or the average regional value on baseline, and then towards the end of those lines, you can see also the benchmarks that the country have set. So that, of course, information will be updated, but also the formats and the visualizations are being improved in time for the September summit. Going to the next slide, this information is also available in print in January on the occasion of the International Day of Education. We launched the SDG4 Data Digest, which describes all these issues that we have just raised, the process, the timeline, because of course the timeline goes back to 2017 when we started this process, all the methodological issues, but also all the information that you need to know. Annex A describes at the time the benchmark submission status, the 6 categories that we described in the pie charts, and which benchmark values countries have submitted, because they have not submitted benchmark values for all indicators and all levels. And then you can see for every indicator the baseline values and the values for 2025 and 2030 that countries are committing. Moving to now the next step and the next slides. Next week, we're actually going to provide officially the update on the information that has been collected since February. Between February and the end of May, we invited countries with a particular focus on the 1 in 3 countries that had not participated the first time around, inviting them to submit values. And these results will be published in the document that you see here on the right-hand end, which essentially is a continuation of our contributions, our joint contributions on the high-level political forum. As you know, the high-level political forum is the apex body that follows up and reviews progress on the SDGs in general. And every 3 to 4 years, it also reviews SDG4. Back in 2019, we had these 2 publications, Meeting and Beyond Commitments, that focus on the quantitative side and on the qualitative side of progress towards SDG4. This year, we're marking this next step, which is actually the fact that countries are providing concrete commitments. So you will be able to see these updates next week when we launch the report on Wednesday at the SDG4 review, and then on a side event in New York on Thursday. But this is only one piece of information that you'll find. The more important piece of information is, in fact, our proposal. Actually, if we stay in the graph or in the slide, is that we're also putting forward a proposal of how we will be monitoring progress towards these national benchmarks. And it's a proposal that, of course, will be eventually reviewed, but we intend to have the first proper reporting on progress towards these benchmarks in January next year, aiming to have that as an annual regular point in the calendar where the latest data will be used to show how countries are moving towards their targets. And last but not least, this publication will also have 12 case studies, because as Sylvia mentioned, this is not just a technical exercise focusing on accountability. It's primarily intended to be a formative exercise, one which will see countries linking their targets with their policies, and where different countries will see what other countries are doing and try to improve their target setting, which we believe is an aspect that has been missing in policy dialogue. And these 12 countries are countries that have, in our view, done a good job in really trying to link their target setting with their policies. And we hope that they will inspire others to think through these issues in the same way. Now, as I mentioned, that's our overall intention. We want to make the benchmark reporting part of our global cooperation mechanism. It's our mandate under functional area 2 to do so and inspire common action. I already mentioned that we will have the regular reporting, but we also plan to have a gathering, a first-time gathering of educational statisticians who actually form the body of our technical cooperation group on SDG4 indicators, because a number of issues came up during these discussions, issues of understanding of indicators, of sourcing, of estimating, of calculating, of making better alignment between national and global indicators. And we plan to convene this body for the first time to create a better understanding of all the issues that have come up in the last 2 years. Last set of slides, our links with the tests. You may have noticed that the benchmarks have not quite yet grasped the imagination of participants in the tests. As Dankert mentioned, I think that's fine. It's a matter of time. We're optimistic that come January, everyone will take notice. But it would be good that the test does make a reference to this work. We know that there have been national consultations, and the national consultations have only rarely featured the benchmarks. Clearly, there have been different channels involved, but we would very much like to see your ministers making reference in the statements that are going to come up in September. But it's also clear that it is necessary to link the benchmarks with the commitments that are going to come up out of the tests, hoping that there will be concrete commitments. So what we're proposing, it's an indicative idea, is that we could extract an indicator, at least one indicator for each action track on a key commitment that the countries and the international community are going to make, and essentially to incorporate these and repeat the process of getting countries to commit to target for those indicators in 2025 and 2030, so that we can integrate them in this process. So the next two slides show an indicative way of approaching this. These are the 7 indicators, or 7 benchmark indicators, as they have been mapped against the SDG4 targets. And indicatively, you see the 5 action track areas on the sideline, because of course they're not by themselves SDG4 targets, but there is a potential, of course, for alignment, primarily financing, but also teachers. So the last slide shows one way of how that mapping and matching can be done, starting with action track 1 on inclusive and equitable, safe and healthy schools. There is, for instance, and that's indicative, I have to stress, it's just an indicative idea of how perhaps we could proceed. School meals have come strongly as a potential activity. So here, the international community in each country could commit to improving school meal provision. And this is, of course, an indicator that could match target 4A. Currently, we don't have school meal and school nutrition and school health, but that one could say is a major omission of our framework. So one could assume that the community comes up with a school meal indicator. We work through the technical cooperation group. We define the indicators. We have already been in some discussion with WFP on that purpose, and we get countries to commit. Secondly, on learning and skills for life, work and sustainable development, climate change education has come strongly as a potential area of focus. Of course, this is a very complicated indicator, but a measure whereby countries would demonstrate how they incorporate climate change education and make that assessment, qualitative assessment, a bit more rigorous, could be such a potential opportunity. Of course, there has been a lot of discussion for learning poverty, but for us, that's a closed topic in the sense that if you combine the 2 global indicators on completion rate and learning proficiency, you get the learning poverty indicator. So that's goes without saying, countries have already been committing on these 2 indicators. Third, on teachers, we have, of course, the trained teacher indicator, but we could have an additional indicator. We propose here one. There has been discussion that to strengthen inclusive education, teachers need to be supported by learning teams. So that would be one measure of potential progress towards strengthening support to teachers. And fourth, digital learning and transformation. There's a lot of discussion about school connectivity, ensuring that every school is connected to the internet. That again could be a potential indicator. Finally, we also propose on financing to incorporate the long-standing commitment, at least for OECD DAC member states, on aid to education. Again, that would complement our commitments to public expenditure and would help balance a little bit of debate. So this is just an indicative set of ideas. Unfortunately, they have not quite yet made it to the discussion. They may come tonight or this evening in the closing stages. It's a proposal we've made, and we're waiting to see if they will be incorporated. But it's a potential way forward of building on a process that has been so generously supported by countries. We have really benefited so well, so much from this collaboration. Sylvia and I and our teams have been really working country by country, indicator by indicator, and that has been hugely refreshing experience, I think, for us and the countries. So we have a process, and we can now build on it to also make our commitments that will come out of the test complete. And that is the end of our presentation. I took a bit longer, but Duncan was very generous in allowing us to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sylvia and Manos. I think this gave a very good overview of both the history and a very strong appeal that to use the benchmark also for the Transforming Education Summit and the outcome for that important meeting. So I think that is a takeaway for all of you to go to your ministers and to convey that message. Because I think following the work on the benchmark, I've been surprised that the way it's been taken on board by countries, and that you really reach something which has a much stronger national ownership than only the SDGs by itself, because that's a kind of a top-down process. Here is a more bottom-up process. So I think it's been a wonderful job done by the two teams. So thanks for that. I allow for 2 questions to Manus or Sylvia. Only 2 questions because of the time limits. Anyone wants to, please state your name and question.
My name is Mario Franco, and I represent one foundation called Millennium do Sustainable Education. I go to be very short, but I want to say 3 things. First, we consider sustainable development goals in 3 ages. First was the goals, second the targets, third the indicators. Then, in our point of view, indicators are the most relevant work and the data collected. Then I want to thank Sylvia and Marcos for the job, and this is very relevant for us. Second point, we launched an initiative with Alexo, the Arab UNESCO, let's say, last 2 weeks ago, which we are proposing for the meeting and for the test, related to the indicator 4A1, special on electric power, computers, and connectivity, the 3. Because we consider special, if we focus in the countries with more needs, the infrastructure of the schools are very important, and we think we need more detailed information on these indicators. Third point and last one. We think it's very important, and we are advocating for that, then a bigger investment, not only from the governments, but also from the private sector and foundations to invest in this kind of information. What we see is the need of more detailed information to fine-tuning not only the policies, but also the offer. Then my question is what you envisage in the coming months to develop, especially in the indicator for A1. And we are able to cooperate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It was mostly policy statements, I understand, but also a question at the end. But before you're giving the floor to answer, I think there is another question here, and that's the last question, please.
Thank you. A question from the International Disability Alliance. SDG4 focuses also on inclusion in education, and I'm just wondering whether from the information that's being gathered, there will be any information about those groups that have been most excluded from education, and thinking mostly, of course, of those with disabilities who are largely out of school or not receiving inclusive education. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very precise question. Manus will answer.
Yeah, let me start with the last one. Inclusion is, of course, very dear to our hearts. As you know, our 2020 report focused on inclusion, and we have been very conscious that the 7 benchmark indicators did not include one such indicator. On disability in particular, there have been, of course, major developments in the last few years in coming up with a common understanding definition. And the issue is that, unfortunately, still we don't have enough information so that we could report on all countries. And that is quite an important concern, because if countries do not report, then the whole benchmarking process does not work. You need to have country coverage of these indicators. But a possibility, as you saw, because we have never forgotten it, was the way we specify the teacher indicator for the Action Track 3. Because inclusion cannot work if teachers are not supported by sufficient number of additional personnel to make inclusive education a reality. And that we think is perhaps a better way to show that countries do commit and do think about how teachers are going to implement inclusive education, because at the end of the day, this is a factor that has been relatively ignored in the process. We need human resources to be for teachers to fulfill our vision. On the briefly on the Alexo, actually, by the way, Alexo is one of the regional organizations we have not been able to establish a good collaboration. We have actually worked very, very closely, as you saw, with the Caribbean community and the European Union, but also with the African Union, the Southeast Asia Ministers of Education Organization, and the Pacific community. So we would really like to work with Alexo very close. Although the countries from the Arab world have participated very strongly thanks to support from our Beirut colleagues. As you saw in the last slides, we do propose school connectivity as a new indicator that would come out of tests. That should be very easy in the sense that it is already a global indicator for A1, so that makes it very simple. We're not changing the monitoring, we're just refining it, and we do need to work a little bit better to specify connectivity. So that would be a good opportunity, but there's also a lot of interest and support from the international community to support investment in that area. So we definitely are very open to the idea, and we look forward to discussing that further.
Thank you very much, Manos. I'm sorry, I'm quite sure there will be a lot of more questions, but we have to keep the program. Now we are moving from the global scene down to what's happening and what's been done at the country level. We have invited speakers from different parts of the world to give some feedback from what they have been doing in working and producing the indicators. And I have posed two questions to the speakers. One is that you work producing the indicators, what's been the challenges, and where are the obstacles you see, and how are they linked to the national plan? So that's one group of questions, which is more historical, what's been done. And the next is what you intend to use the benchmarks for. How could they feed into policy discussions at the national level or regional level? With us today for this, we have Mrs. Susana Gardona, Education Affairs, Permanent Delegation of Mexico to UNESCO. Very welcome. We have Adama Momu, Director of Policy and Planning, Department of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, Sierra Leone. And Professor Kashinika Hirimu-Burigama, Ambassador of Sri Lanka to France and Permanent Delegate to UNESCO. Ayubuan. And Laura Treman, Counselor for Education and Science, SDG4, Education 2030, High-Level Steering Committee Sherpa from Latvia, and with the permanent delegation of Latvia to OECD and UNESCO. So I'm very delighted to have you all here. And I just go around and then I allow for questions from the audience afterwards. And please keep your intervention relatively short, 2 to 3 minutes, please. And we start with Mexico, please. No, just, yeah.
Well, good morning to everybody, and thank you for inviting Mexico to this very important and interesting presentation. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Institute for Statistics of UNESCO and the GEM report team, because I think the work that you're doing is very valuable for all countries. It's an enormous task. I was talking to Ms. Sylvia Montoya last time, and I was telling her that I can't imagine how it is to receive all this data and trying to put it in a single organized work. So congratulations as well to to the Institute. So for Mexico, this process has been very interesting, very intense, and it has been accelerated as well because of the pandemic. As Manos was just explaining, there will be a publication with 12 case studies, and Mexico will be highlighted as one of the countries that was followed a good process, but this good process has come as well with a lot of challenges and a lot of meetings and groundbreaking themes that we haven't addressed before. So in the view of Mexico, we conceive follow-up and monitoring of SDG4 as a non-linear and open to improvement process based on three basic premises. All countries still have a way to go. We don't, at this point, as we have stressed in most of the meetings here at the pre-summit and in different other education meetings, we haven't, no country is able to say that we have achieved SDG4. So by adopting a comprehensive approach and also a lifelong learning perspective, SDG4 should transcend compulsory and formal education in our view. Each country has to have its own route. So it is up to governments to convert global target into national realistic targets based on their institutions, based on their historic rates, and as well their national plans of education. And we also believe that there is no single tool to measure progress. This indicator serves as coordinates, as starting points of the baseline, as well as arrival points to assess the degree of compliance. And in some cases, these arrival points are absolute, but in others are relative, as in the target 4.4 that refers to increase the number of young people in higher education. So it is convenient to each government to translate them and make an introspective process of what it means for their own countries. So having this in mind, the Ministry of Public Education established values of reference, taking into account a set of elements which basically are the following three: national priorities based on our sectorial education program 2020-2024, consultations with national and international bodies, and also historical trends of the behavior in the indicators selected. So it has been a very enriching process, and we managed to see that we were having divergences within our national institutions. The Ministry of Education was doing some policy planning based on their own measurements, and even the information given by regional and international bodies, but also our National Institute of Statistics was basing their numbers on other types of measurements. So I'm just going to mention some of the divergences that we have found and that since then we have managed to solve. One, as I said, external sources used for calculations, for example, the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, economic figures, or even UNDP ones. Differences between national and international definitions of indicators. I think that has been one of the major issues that we have discussed with the UNESCO Regional Office and as well with the Institute of Statistics. And so far, I think we've made a very introspective process, which has led us to a good baseline now. Different time cuts and rounding up the figures to make international comparability possible. So in order to compare again the figures, we were rounding up, and maybe this was also giving us differences. Data transformation through the circuit when used in international organizations for the production of other indicators. And lastly, different data sources based in the same calculation formula. For example, enrollment or administrative data and the national population census. So all of that has been taken into account. And so far, Mexico, I think we're very proud to say that we are on the same page, both at regional and national institutions, which will help us better feed into the international level. So before I end, I just want to share the 3 lessons learned by Mexico and the challenges which we still envision. The first one is generate synergies between all the concurrent processes. We have to periodically review indicators. We cannot just leave the indicator there and just feed it. We have to review that it's still in the mindset of the moment, in the goals we want to achieve, particularly now with taking into account SDG4. We apply a systemic approach to monitoring. So each level has one piece of the puzzle that has to be shared with other key actors if we want to accelerate the progress of achieving SDG4. And lastly, SDG4 monitoring is not a linear, but a more of a spiral-shaped process. We have to advocate for a flexible approach to benchmark that allows us to adjust significant policy changes and major disruptions such as COVID-19. So paradoxically, COVID-19 allowed a lot of the actors involved in the national indicators to make some kind of a pause. And through Zoom and through meetings online, we were able to make us accelerate this process on the benchmarks. So in our case, this was a very substantial advancement during the pandemic time. And we are hoping to continue working as well as we have with the international organization, and as well to have some recognition to this work in the TESS Summit. And definitely we will advocate along with you to make it part of the commitments of this meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for interesting, modest, but very ambitious. So thanks a lot. We're moving across the Atlantic Ocean to Sierra Leone and Adama Momo. It must be fun and challenging working in your ministry, because so dedicated, both president and the minister. So it's a challenge upon your shoulder, I would guess, but also, I guess, fun to work. But please, and please keep it short.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for inviting Sierra Leone to this meeting. We are grateful and we are appreciative of the effort being made by both UNESCO, UIS, IEP, and all the rest supporting Sierra Leone. Well, starting with the national benchmarking, we went into it when we were about to develop our new sector plan. We were actually on the verge of doing the education sector diagnostic analysis to inform the next sector plan. And of course, that one was completed in 2019, and we identified key drivers that we think we can take upon as a government to move education forward. And based on the diagnostic analysis, we find out that there are a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to data to inform decision making. So based on that analysis, we actually developed our new sector plan, which we have completed, and is based on all of our international agreements we have signed up onto, our national policies, our national reforms and stuff like that. So we had a lot of stakeholders engagement, I mean, both bilaterally, multilaterally, national, and even at local level. So we identify key challenges, and one of those challenges have to do with learning outcomes. Yes, the expired sector plan, actually, the focus was on getting access, increasing access, because of after the war, we need to have children into the school. So we were able to improve on access, but the quality of learning was challenged, you know, when it comes to the relevance of itself. So what we identified, linking them to this national benchmarking, was actually the overarching goal was to increase learning outcomes in schools. And in that, we focus on instructional core, we focus on access, equity, especially gender equality in and through education. So if you find out that the new sector plan we have 9 priority objectives, and all of those are linked to actually the indicators I'm seeing there. You know, when you talk about connectivity, when you talk about improved data collection, when you talk about gender equality in and through education, when you talk about the teacher quality, the equity issues, you know. So government also, for us to address some of these benchmark, because we have challenges, but we'll come to the challenges. For us to address some of these challenges, government also adopted this inclusive radical inclusion policy. Sierra Leone was one of the countries that lifted the ban on pregnant girls to return back to school, because there was a ban on pregnant girls accessing school. So they were challenged. So, but with the lifting of that ban, actually, that has given them hope that they will come back to school and actually improve on some of our indicators. So what we did in the sector plan is actually to have systemic targets, especially when you talk about climate change. You know, our minister was did attend the COP meeting, and from there we make sure that the climate change was actually factored in our sector plan, so that will enhance our reporting, you know, at national level, especially at a forum like this. Notwithstanding that, we have tried to submit our benchmarks to UIS, even though there are challenges, but we know with government, with the political will, with improved capacity, with improved dialogue, collaboration, both multilateral, bilateral, and even at national level, we can improve on some of these indicators. So as action points, of course, the challenges, as my colleague has mentioned, we have challenges in actually international comparability when it comes to data, because sometimes we use our national statistics, which sometimes is not used by other institutions. So for you to get the same rate is challenging, and you now start to reason, which of the indicators will I go by? Am I using my national population census? Am I using the UNDP population census? So we have those kind of challenges. Also, we have challenge with the main statistical bureau, you know, in terms of actually collecting. We are doing administrative data, but when it comes to household data, it is collected by Statistics Sierra Leone, for instance, and this takes sometimes 10 years, 5 years. So, I mean, for you to compare those two data will be very challenging, except you have to use some modeling issues. So we have all of those challenges. But notwithstanding that, I think we have the political drive to move to improve on this. The new sector plan, we have developed the result framework, which we can review year by year. We have factored some of these indicators, and we hope to improve on it, having the political willingness to drive the action. We also need to align our partners' intervention, because we are having challenge, especially when it comes to indicators like improving learning proficiency in English and math, you know, because we are mostly dependent on donors, so the donors actually drive their actions sometimes. So that's also is a challenge. And of course, we need continuous policy dialogue to actually improve on this reporting. Of course, increased capacity building, both at the service level and at the delivery level, because in our infrastructure, if you want to get to have trained teachers, and if you compare trained teachers to pupils, of course, the class size has to also be taken into consideration. We have huge class sizes, which actually we not augur well when we want to compare the trained teachers as per class size. So those are some of my challenges I will try to.
Thank you very much. And I know you're both president and Minister of Education is chairing the important high-level steering committee as well as the Sherpa group, and I really would convey that I know that your Minister of Education is strongly believing in the benchmark and have been advocating strongly for them, but please ask him to continue that work. Thank you very much. Then we move to Asia. ambassador from Sri Lanka. So please, and I'm very much aware of the time. If we should be allowing some questions, we need to keep our time very short.
Thank you. Aiboan, wish you long life. Bonjour. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Manus, for inviting Sri Lanka. And also thank you for the very informative information. Now, Sri Lanka, the literacy rate is 94%. And the DGP percentage is about 2.8 given for education. I think that's the third highest. And we have 50,000 classrooms in public sector, having 22 million people. Ministry of Education and the University Grants Commission Sri Lanka, the higher education sector, they have developed the SDG4 benchmarks values, and we are, as we discussed, we have the 7 targets, and Sri Lanka, we still have to do a few sectors. However, with the COVID-19 pandemic situation, the Sri Lanka switched on to digital and open distance learning as in all other countries. So however, with the digital learning, it's necessary to set up SDG4 benchmarks values for the digital learning. And also we have modified and taken extra steps to fulfill the commitment made in the 2015 for setting the SDG4 benchmarks. I think we have SDG5. We have achieved SDG5 because there are more girls in education than boys. So therefore, we have to tackle to have more boys in education. In fact, all we are concerned about education for all, and up to 14 age, everybody has to go to schools. Nobody can be employed up to 14 age. So however, with the digital learning, we now have to develop more extra benchmarks. Now, the team of Ministry of Education is already working on these benchmarks for getting into the policy planning. We have Ministry of Education for the entire country and the provincial education sectors. So once they make the policy planning considering the benchmarks, they will be, the implementation will be with the provincial departments, and that will go to all the schools. The digital platform has affected rural schools because there is no internet connections, etc. However, we are yet to do this early childhood, because for school education, we concentrate more on academic rather than the social and psychological effects, where the individual learning abilities have not been looked into. We do have to have that early childhood look into this, because we have different, each child has different way of learning. So therefore we have to give concentration on each and every child. Yesterday, our education minister met Manus, and we discussed that. Therefore, I'm sure he will give more concentration on this benchmarking and getting into it policy planning. Schools are given mid-meals, not all schools, a few of some provinces. And we do have the teacher training center, category 2 center, for South Asia Teacher Training Center. And so therefore we are involved in the teacher training for the South Asia also. With this, I think I have more or less covered. Thank you so much.
Istuti, thank you very much. Then we move from Asia to northern part of Europe, Latvia. And here is also a voice that speaks directly into the Sherpa group, I think.
Yes.
So, but first of all, your work on the national benchmark.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm aware of the time. So Latvia thanks the UNESCO for this invitation. And we are strongly behind the Education 2030 framework of action on establishing appropriate intermediate benchmarks for 7 SDG4 indicators. And we are very grateful to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and the Global Education Monitoring report team for their tremendous patience and excellent cooperation in working on our case study. And this open cooperation was a key enabler on the successful benchmark setting process. Interconnection between the SDGs and the national policy is essential for successful implementation of the 2030 agenda. And in Latvia in 2017, we conducted a national mapping exercise to define the connection of the SDGs with the policy directions in the Latvia strategic documents, as well as to identify the possible data sources for SDGs indicators, including SDG4. And in education, it's of course the main document is Education Development Guidelines, now set for 2027, and it is largely based and aligned with SDG4, also stressing the importance of regular and effective education quality monitoring. And policy directions and outcomes defined in this document have a corresponding set of benchmark indicators and key performance indicators, medium term and long term. They are selected based on availability of quality of data, relevance of indicators and their compliance with national priorities, as well as international recommendations, UNESCO, but also OECD, European Commission, and which is important, also international comparability of indicators. There is a strong alignment with SDG4 and the national level benchmarks. But I want to speak a bit about the obstacles. It may not be so difficult to benchmark indicators if there are reliable data sources. From our point of view, the most difficult thing is to assess whether there will be enough political commitment, financial resources and policy measures to move beyond merely the statistical forecasting. And it is most difficult to assess whether we can add our will and commitment to reach a higher value that it is forecasted by a statistical way alone. Also, uncertainty is probably the most difficult aspect, because who can include uncertainty in our calculations? As the global education meeting in 2020, at this meeting, countries were asked to accelerate the progress and propose relevant and realistic benchmarks. In our view, there's just some tension between relevance and realism. Because the current situation calls for a more relevant benchmark to be a more ambitious benchmark when we look at the global situation. However, the more ambitious the benchmark, the more unrealistic it is. So there is this contradiction. And I have also emphasized the importance of basing benchmarks on reliable and accurate data sources. And in our case, some of our information systems do not contain the complete exhaustive information required for this indicator. For example, our state education information system only records data on qualified teachers who have completed a full initial teacher education program, but not on teachers who have completed higher education outside of current initial teacher education programs and received a teacher qualification after completion of a special 72-hour program. So there are discrepancies as to what our data systems contain and what we need to measure. As regards the policy planning and implementation, we appreciate that the team emphasizes the importance of communication and visualization of benchmark indicators and progress towards them. This is particularly important in the context of communication and collaboration with various stakeholders. And in Latvia, the development of education quality monitoring system is one of the key investments here and entails a lot of public discussions. And we are working on user-friendly monitoring tools and data communication dashboards, trying to facilitate this communication and visibility, understandability of what we are trying to achieve. And this really equips stakeholders such as regional education authorities and educational institutions on a local level to easily access data and to make informed decisions. And on the whole, I want to say that we see this benchmark monitoring as a great platform to be used to foster dialogue between all the parties, and not just nationally, but also internationally. And Latvia is promoting a culture of and a mindset of decision making that is based on data and evidence. And so this discussions and dialogues around benchmarking is very helpful to do that. And of course, as you said, Latvia is in the SDG4 high-level steering committee, our minister being there, and we are full commitment to ensure also the political leadership in this regard on this global education priorities and stronger accountability incentives for accelerating the progress towards SDG4. Thank you. I hope I didn't take too much time.
Thank you very much for very good points. And I think you raised some of the important issues that some of the SDGs are challenging. And with the present global environment, it's even more challenging than it was 4 years ago. And the benchmark may be a tool, at least, to have more qualified discussion on where both to give priorities but also to what level, instead of just having a pick and choose without the data. So I think the benchmark should also be seen in this perspective. So thank you very much. I promised that there will be a round of questions. I'm very much aware of the time. I keep my promise, but I will have only one question and one answer. So anyone that would like to pose a question to, yes, please.
Thank you very much. Let me thank Mrs. Monge for that succinct presentation. But I want to get to this point of having reliable and credible data, especially in conducting the annual school census. We spoke of data challenges, which one should be towards, whether the UNDP or StatSerio. Now, how can we move to that point, having a credible data after we launch the annual school census, and not go back to schools to do head count with regards to the gross enrollment rates, which makes partners find it very difficult to trust or to say the annual school census data is reliable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this question is very much particular to Sierra Leone. But of course, you're also pointing at a general issue that was raised around the table between the different sources of data.
Yes, partner need data to support education.
But for the Sierra Leone question, I think I leave it to you to sort it out bilaterally between yourself. Yes, please, Magnus.
I think it's a general issue that you're raising. I think Ms. Momo also mentioned a little bit indirectly in her presentation. One of the challenges that Sierra Leone is facing is being able to report on the learning indicators, because you mentioned the school census, which does not cover those. And here in our forthcoming report, regional report on Africa, on primary education and foundational learning, we cover Sierra Leone as a case study, and it's a case study that's not specific as an issue for Sierra Leone, but it's for many countries in Africa, where so many different partners, donor partners, go and carry out learning assessments, but without any plan and without any clear direction as to how national capacity will be developed to be able to do such assessments in the future. And I think that it raises the broader issue on collaboration between, it's not just national issues sometimes. Countries furthest behind from establishing such infrastructure need the support, but this support from the international community needs to be coordinated, because so far we have seen very little evidence that international development partners are really thinking long-term, helping countries to establish their own processes to collect data and be able to then analyze them and use them.
Thank you very much. I'm very sorry. We started 10 minutes after time, and we are now 10 minutes past time. So I'll be closing the session, and I think I'll try to summarize what I feel my takeaways, and you may agree or you may not disagree, but that will be for a corridor discussion afterwards. One is that first, I would very much like to thank you all for participating in this event. Benchmarking is a powerful tool. It could be used very well, both at national level, but also to advocate for education at the global level and regional level. So it is, my points are that it is a process that's been started at the national level. It is coming to the regional level. And I think it's a continuous process, both for fine-tuning the indicators and not least the data delivery and the quality of the data. It should be a collaborative efforts between different stakeholders at national levels and also at the global levels, and also between development partners and national governments. I know that I can speak on behalf of the two teams here, that they will support you if you need support for refining to work better on the benchmark, national benchmark. They will support you with a very dedicated team. So use them, utilize them, and I know they have some limits, but still they're very willing. And my last point is that for this to have a strong backing, it needs to be on the table of the Transformative Education Summit in September. And that's the duty of everyone in this room to ensure that that happens. So thank you very much for taking part. Take you to the speakers. So have a nice last day of this pre-summit, and then maybe we see you in half a year. Thank you very much.